You have data everywhere, but is it working together? Meet Curator, the automotive industry's first unified intelligence engine. Curator unifies data from all corners of your dealership to transform marketing, sales, and customer interactions. See it today at gibagoo.com.
Welcome to Daily Drive for Friday, May 23rd, 2025. I'm Larry Veliquette in Metro Detroit, in for Jamie Butters, who's on assignment.
And I'm Jake Neer in Detroit, in for Kellen Walker. Today on the show, the U.S. Senate sends a bill to end California's gasoline car ban to President Trump's desk. Canadian auto leaders see an end in sight for U.S. vehicle tariffs, and GM's Oshawa assembly plant could build military vehicles amid U.S. import taxes. Plus, Tom Oscherwitz of Informed.IQ says even though the CFPB and FTC are shells of their former selves, auto lenders and F&I offices are still putting themselves at risk if they slack on consumer protection requirements.
I do have a concern that we're going to now have 50 states doing things as opposed to one federal approach.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry.
The U.S. Senate has voted to block California's emissions regulations, which would effectively ban gasoline-powered cars and other vehicles by 2035. It sent the measure to President Donald Trump for his signature on Thursday. The 51-44 roll call vote rolls back an Environmental Protection Agency waiver, allowing California to enact its own emission standards. The state-level regulations are more restrictive than the U.S. government's emission requirements and were designed to rapidly increase sales of electric and other zero-emission vehicles. 11 other states, representing about a third of the U.S. auto market, also adopted California's regulations. The decision to repeal California's waiver is a lobbying win for automakers and dealers who had pushed back hard against the state-level rules. California's Attorney General Rob Bonta said in March that Californians are, quote, prepared to defend ourselves if the Congressional Review Act is, quote, wrongfully weaponized. California is expected to challenge the use of the Congressional Review Act in court.
The drive to lift recent U.S. auto tariffs within North America is gaining traction in Washington. That's as fallout from the up to 25% tax imposed earlier this year by the Trump administration depresses vehicle production across the region and threatens industry profitability. Flavio Volpe is CEO of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association in Canada. He says the upcoming G7 summit is a good, quote, pressure point to expand the recent USMCA auto parts carve-out to cover all autos between the United States and Canada.
And I would not be surprised if we announce a framework or a very specific solution then.
Volpe told our sibling publication, Automotive News Canada, that although there's hope of a deal soon, a reprieve on finished vehicles remains a taller order. G7 leaders are scheduled to meet in Alberta, Canada in mid-June.
Staying north of the border, Canada's Industry Minister, Melanie Joly, suggests that a drive to bolster Canada's military will form part of Ottawa's response to U.S. auto tariffs. Joly toured General Motors' Oshawa assembly plant on Thursday. It's a factory that recently absorbed a direct hit from Trump's 25% auto tariffs. While Joly didn't provide insight on what was discussed, she said the country's auto sector is under, quote, huge pressure from the U.S. tariffs. She suggested higher federal defense spending could provide support for industries affected by tariffs, including automotive.
This is an opportunity that we haven't seen since the Second World War to build in Canada and to help sectors that are affected by the tariffs. And so that's also why I was at GM in Oshawa.
But neither Joly or the automaker would specifically comment on the minister's visit. The minister's office didn't immediately respond to a request for comment from Automotive News Canada.
And for you racing fans, Team Pensky parted ways with IndyCar Series team president Tim Cindric, managing director Ron Rosinski, and general manager Kyle Moyer. That's after the discovery of a violation of IndyCar rules by the team in the form of an illegally modified part on the team's race cars. The move came just days before the Indianapolis 500 this weekend. Team founder and chairman Roger Pensky said, quote, "Nothing is more important than the integrity of our sport and our race teams. We have had organizational failures during the last 2 years, and we had to make necessary changes. I apologize to our fans, our partners, and our organization for letting them down." Pensky owns Team Pensky, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and the IndyCar Series sanctioning body. The team's drivers will start the Indy 500 in the back of the pack because of the violation. Jamie is in Indianapolis for the race. You can hear more about this and his coverage of the Indy 500 over the weekend on our Weekend Drive edition of the show. And those are today's headlines. Larry Veliquette back by popular demand here on Daily Drive. What is your reaction to California's CARB waiver, the end of which would now be in front of President Trump on his desk at the White House? I don't think there's much doubt that he'll quickly sign that bill to end the CARB waiver. What do you think would be the short-term and long-term effects of something like this?
Well, I'll tell you, Jake, it's great to be back, number one. Number two, I think what you'll see now, we're really at maybe the end of the beginning, not the beginning of the end of this. Going through Congress and going through the Congressional Review Act was always going to be the messiest way to accomplish this because it's going to end up in court. And that means that California is going to keep enforcing or trying to enforce what had been its right to regulate its air quality. So this is going to be ugly from now on, right? And we're going to have what is the worst thing for the auto industry, right? Which is indecision. Are these going to stay? Are these going to go? We may not find out until some court rules somewhere down the road that yes or no, and then all the appeals for that are exhausted. It would have been far easier to have perhaps a negotiation because I don't think any of these states, all of these states are starting to realize that the market is just not there yet.
Just what the industry needed, right? More uncertainty.
Exactly. But you know what? Hey, in terms of the Penske driver thing, I always thought, if you really wanted to penalize a team, right? You'd let them start at the back of the pack, but you'd make them drive the race backwards against the flow of traffic, right?
And that's why you should be part of the governing body there, Larry.
Exactly.
Talk about entertainment in Indy this weekend. Like I said, Jamie's there. He'll be watching. He'll see if any cars are driving backwards for us. You can hear more about that starting tomorrow on Saturday on Weekend Drive. Thanks, Larry. Coming up, Tom Oscherwitz of Informed.IQ joins the show to talk about how F&I offices should protect themselves against consumer protection violations, even with the FTC and CFPB hobbled. That's next on Daily Drive.
Your dealership has no shortage of customer information. But when that data is conflicting, messy, and spread across a multitude of platforms, it's impossible to activate properly. As the automotive industry's first unified intelligence engine, Curator enriches and unifies your customer data across platforms, like your CRM, your DMS, your website, and even your marketing efforts. It then injects that information back into your most vital systems to provide a single view of each customer and equip your sales team with the information they need to close a deal. When one of the largest volume Subaru dealers in the country wanted to tap into its data goldmine, they turned to Curator. In just 4 months, Huberger Subaru experienced a 55% higher closing ratio and a return of 15 times their investment. Want to see it for yourself? Check out the case study at goobagoo.com/curator. That's GUBAGOO.com/curator.
Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Larry Veliquette with Jake Neer. One of the Trump administration's first actions this year was to make deep cuts to consumer protection agencies in Washington, D.C. But Informed.IQ General Counsel Tom Oscherwitz says F&I offices and auto lenders need to stay vigilant. He spoke with Automotive News senior editor Dan Shine about how state regulators might pick up the slack from agencies such as the FTC and CFPB. They also talk about how good compliance mitigates reputational risk and fosters consumer trust.
Tom, thanks so much for joining me on the F&I Friday edition of Daily Drive.
Hey, Dan, so glad to be here.
So, the CARS rule, may it rest in peace. The Combating Auto Retail Scams rule, which got a lot of dealerships and dealers unnerved for a while that they were going to be, the FTC was going to put these onerous, rules on them, and they said it was going to take longer for customers to buy a vehicle, going to cost more in time and money. The NADA and the Texas Auto Dealer Association took it to court. They won, and then President Trump was elected, and the FTC has kind of let this 90-day window lapse where they could have asked the Supreme Court to overturn the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals decision, meaning that for intents and purposes, the CARS rule has gone away. And what does this mean? Does this mean now no regulatory environment, dealers can get away with it, whatever they want? What do you see as the outcome of this?
Dan, these are really interesting times. And one thing I would say is that one thing that compliance folks hate more than almost anything is uncertainty. And right now we're uncertain. So it's much better when we have known rules where we know what we have to comply with. And here right now, we have this issue where it looks like the federal government, both at the FTC and at the CFPB, has retrenched. Some people have called the CFPB now a zombie administration, and that while it's not officially dead, it's going to be really quiet for the next 4 years. Does that mean you can take a break, relax, and not think about compliance? I don't think so. One, the states are going to fill the gap. Just to give you an example, the Pennsylvania governor, Josh Shapiro, on May 1st, issued a new official complaint line for the state of Pennsylvania, just like the CFPB complaint line. For those who are interested, it's 1-866 PA complaint, and they're going to look at all sorts of issues that relate to consumers, including complaints about dealers or lenders or others.
Again, I think people see this and they say, the dismantling of the CFPB and kind of who's running the FTC, if anybody's running the FTC. And I think people think, the fox is guarding the hen house now. But under the first Trump administration, I think, they did 9 actions against dealerships, including the Bronx Honda, paid $1.5 million. So it wasn't like they didn't do anything. But people kind of said it was, in many ways, it was much like the Obama administration. It was just quieter. Talk a little bit about how Trump was in his first term. And just if you think, again, this regulatory environment is how it's going to play out in the next 4 years.
Well, I definitely think there's a much more active political approach to regulation in the second Trump term. I know from the CFPB where I was at, Kathy Canninger, the director, pretty much focused on basic blocking and tackling. If you were doing fraud, they were after you, but there weren't really advanced theories. This administration has really taken a forward step and said, hey, we're not going to enforce basically disparate impact fair lending. They gave a refund to Townstone, which was doing some auto lending and other types of lending. They've rescinded 11 cases that they were enforcing. But I guess my view is I still think they're going to go after basic fraud, but I think the biggest area is going to be at the states and also private litigants. And the other thing I would emphasize is that just because there isn't a regulator doesn't mean that you shouldn't think about compliance. Most laws, not all, have a reason why they're there. So, for example, what is a UDAP, an unfair, deceptive, or abusive practice? It's a description of where somebody's been defrauded. So if you're doing good compliance, you're probably going to be fine regardless whether there's a law or not. And also, just think about it. If you're an ordinary business and you're doing bad customer service, whether there's a rule or not, it's going to affect your customer satisfaction.
The basic message to dealerships and dealers is still do right by the customer.
Right. There may be people who are going to, if they want a short-term profitability, there may be a way for people to do arbitrage and not do the right thing for the short period of time. But long-term, if you want a good business, you want a loyal customer, you still should focus on good business sense and doing right by the customer.
And I think when you're talking about unfair or deceptive of acts, there's also this rule of unfair or deceptive fees that was kind of that the FTC kind of introduced, but it kind of went along with the CARS rule. So if the CARS rule is gone, this could kind of take its place. It's not as wide ranging as the CARS rule, but it's still, again, trying to look after the consumer. And this may be something that, again, dealerships will have to deal with, and very similar to what the CARS rule was, of just, again, acting in good faith with the consumers and not trying to hide fees and things like that.
And, Dan, you're absolutely right. And not only that, there are a number of fees that are basically state law fees. So, for example, if you're talking about GAP or other types of fees, those come from the states. So there's still going to be a lot of issues, particularly on the state level, where folks are going to have to comply.
Yeah, it's interesting. And again, I think people who think that this means that, dealers can get away with whatever they want now I think is widely mistaken. Like you said, state AGs have, kind of vowed in different states to kind of take up the fight for consumers. And like you said, it's just not good practice. I don't think, it's not good for your dealership. It's not good for reputation and retention if people think that you're cheating them.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is just from a business perspective, if you are using AI or using other types of advanced products, you need to understand, how they work, what they're doing, how the company's organized. And frankly, if you have good monitoring programs in place, you'll run your business better.
It's hard in these, so many uncertainties going on right now, Tom, but if you can look into your crystal ball, I mean, how do you see maybe the next couple of years shaping up in kind of that regulatory fashion for auto dealerships?
I think the one thing that's really going to be frustrating for folks is there's going to be a lot of uncertainty, right? We don't know. There's state laws coming out. When there's a gap in federalization, the states are going to go forward, which means that people are going to have to be vigilant about what individual states are doing. And I do have a concern that we're going to now have 50 states doing things as opposed to one federal approach. But I do think there are some areas where, frankly, there's going to be less focus. And I think one would be sort of in the DEI space and in the fair lending space. But overall, I think the one thing that we will see is a little bit, unfortunately, more uncertainty.
Yeah. Yep. Tom, great conversation. Really appreciate your insights. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Tom Oscherwitz is General Counsel with Informed.IQ. He spoke with our own Dan Shine. That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Larry Veliquette, in for Jamie Butters.
And I'm Jake Neer, in for Kellen Walker. Thanks to David Kennedy and Greg Layson of our sibling publication, Automotive News Canada, for their reporting for today's podcast. You can get the latest news on finance and insurance, environmental regulations, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com.
Come back over the weekend for our Weekend Drive edition of the show. We'll hear from a panel of auto retail experts about the impacts of tariffs so far on dealers and what they expect in the coming weeks.
Our real concern comes in late June and then in July and August, where we think we'll be very short of product.
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoy the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Have a good weekend, everybody.